At first she was just the new neighbor in Unit 4B, standing beside a stack of sealed boxes in jeans and a gray sweater, arguing with a delivery guy about where he'd left a lamp. Normal scene. End of shift, bad coffee still in my mouth, keys in my hand, brain half shut down. I would have kept walking if she hadn't turned a little and said, "Sorry, am I blocking your door?" Then I saw her face properly. Not because I knew her from real life. Because I knew it from the worst 5 minutes of someone else's. There are cases that stay in your notes and cases that stay in your ribs. This one had been in my ribs for 6 years. Middle of the night. Husband brought in after a highway rollover. Too much going wrong too fast. We moved hard, moved clean, did what we were trained to do. On paper, everything was documented, reviewed, signed off. No hearing, no complaint that went anywhere, no headline, no scene outside the ER doors. Just a file that ended and a question that didn't. Could I have seen one thing sooner? Could I have bought him one more minute? Could I have made one call in a different order and changed the whole night? I had asked myself versions of that so many times it stopped sounding like language and started sounding like weather. And now his wife was standing 10 feet from me with a box cutter in one hand. I said, "No, you're fine," and unlocked my door like my pulse wasn't climbing. She thanked me. I went inside. I stood there in my kitchen without turning on the light. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe I was tired. Maybe grief changes faces in your memory the way old photos do. 2 days later I saw the name on a package outside her place. Sarah Miller. That ended the maybe. Her husband had been Daniel Miller. I remembered because I'd said his name out loud that night more than once, like saying it harder could hold him here. I remembered signing the last page of the chart at 4:12 a.m. I remembered walking into the family room and seeing her stand before I spoke, like she already knew. After that, I started avoiding my own hallway. It would have been funny if it didn't feel so pathetic. I'd check the peephole before taking out trash. Wait an extra minute if I heard her door open. Cut through the back stairs instead of using the front entrance. I'm a grown man, an ER physician, and suddenly I was hiding from a woman carrying groceries. She, on the other hand, acted calm. Not warm. Not cold. Measured. The first time she stopped me on purpose, she was kneeling by her mailbox with 3 envelopes in her hand. "Hey," she said, glancing up. "Do these boxes jam all the time or am I just lucky?" I should have muttered something and kept going. Instead I stepped over, looked at the bent metal latch, and told her the trick was lifting the door before turning the key. She tried it. It worked. "Good," she said. I was about to declare war on federal infrastructure. I gave a short laugh before I could stop it. She looked at me for half a beat too long. "You're Dr. Carter, right?" There it was. Not accusation. Not anger. Just my name, placed gently between us like she wanted to see what I'd do with it. "Yeah," I said. "You work nights?" "Some. My husband used to." She said it casually, eyes on the mailbox, like it had slipped out by accident. Different field. I felt my shoulders go tight. She closed the little metal door, then straightened. "Sorry. New place. I'm making awkward neighbor conversation badly." "It's fine." But it wasn't. She knew that too. After that, she found reasons. Small ones. A question about trash pickup. Whether the water always ran cold on the top floor in the morning. If the pharmacy on Mercer stayed open late. Nothing strange on the surface. Everything strange underneath. And I started noticing things I didn't want to notice. That she had clearly chosen this building, even though there were newer ones nearby. That she seemed to know my schedule before neighbors usually do. That when she asked simple questions, she listened like the answer mattered for more than the moment. One evening I came home and saw her sitting on the curb beside her parked car, phone in hand, not looking at the screen. "You okay?" I asked before I could decide not to. She looked up. Flat tire. I glanced at it. It wasn't flat. Just low. You can still drive that to a station. I know, she said. I just needed a minute before pretending I had everything under control. That one landed harder than it should have. I stood there with my work bag still on my shoulder. She studied me the same quiet way she always did, and for the first time I had the full, clear feeling that neither of us was standing near a stranger. She wasn't here by chance. And whatever she wanted from me, it hadn't started when she moved in. I realized I wasn't standing next to a stranger. If you're enjoying the story, please like and subscribe to see the truth unfold. The thing about working emergency medicine is that people assume it hardens you. Like if you spend enough years around broken bodies and bad outcomes, eventually everything hits you less. That's not really how it works. You just get better at functioning while something is hitting you. Sarah figured that out before I ever said it. It started with ordinary things that should have stayed ordinary. A power outage one wet Thursday night when half the block lost electricity and everyone came out into the hall pretending they weren't annoyed. She was standing outside her apartment with a flashlight under her chin, making herself look ridiculous on purpose. "Good," she said when she saw me. "At least if there's a serial killer in the building, I'll have a doctor nearby." I should have smiled and gone back inside. Instead I leaned against the wall across from her and said, "That's not actually useful in the order you're hoping." She laughed, and for a second it felt easy. Too easy. We stood there listening to rain hit the windows at the end of the hall. Somebody downstairs was swearing at a breaker box. She asked if outages happened often. I said not often enough to make management fix anything. She asked if I'd just come off shift. I said yes. She studied my face in that direct, quiet way of hers. "Bad one?" I looked at her. "You ask that like you already know there are different kinds." "There are," she said. "There's tired, and there's the kind where you're still halfway somewhere else." That was the first time I felt the ground shift a little. Most people hear what I do and either want stories or want distance. Sarah never did either. She noticed without pushing. It made me lower my guard in ways I didn't mean to. A couple days later I found her in the parking lot trying to carry 2 paper grocery bags and a case of bottled water at the same time. "You're going to drop that," I said. "I'm aware." I took the water from her before she could object. She didn't thank me right away. She just watched me walk beside her like she was measuring something. "Inside the stairwell," she said, "you always this helpful, or only when people are about to injure themselves in front of you?" Professional reflex. That sounds exhausting. It is. At her door she set the bags down and said, "Do you want a beer?" I should have said no. Instead I heard myself say, "One." Her apartment was still only half set up. Books stacked against the wall. A lamp on the floor because apparently the delivery problem from day one had never fully ended. No pictures out. No decorations that told you who lived there. It looked temporary even though she'd clearly made the decision to stay. She handed me a bottle and sat on one end of the couch while I took the chair across from her. It was a stupid amount of distance for 2 neighbors sharing a drink, which only made me more aware of it. She asked how long I'd been at County Memorial. I told her 11 years. She asked whether I always wanted trauma work. I said no one really knows what they want until they've done enough of it to regret the answer. That got a small smile out of her. Then she asked, "Do you ever remember specific patients?" It was such a clean question that it almost got past me. "Some," I said. "Not all." "No. What makes one stay?" I took a drink and bought myself a second. "Timing. Age. Family. Sometimes no reason that makes sense." She nodded like that fit into a place she'd already prepared for it. I asked what she did for work now. She said remote project management for a logistics company, mostly numbers and deadlines and fixing other people's bad planning. She said it like it was a joke, but she looked tired when she said it. Not work tired. Life tired. The more time I spent around her, the more I saw it. She held herself together with too much discipline. Her place was neat in a way that felt controlled rather than relaxed. She slept badly, I could tell from the hallway lights under her door at strange hours. Sometimes I'd come home at 6 in the morning and hear her moving around inside like she hadn't gone to bed at all. One Sunday morning, I found her sitting on the back steps behind the building in a sweatshirt, holding a mug with both hands. "You don't sleep either?" she asked without looking up. "Not reliably." She moved her bag so I could sit. It was cold enough that our breath showed. We stayed quiet for a while. It didn't feel empty. That was the part that started getting dangerous. After a minute she said, "Do you ever get used to being the person people look at when something goes wrong?" I turned to her. "That's a strange question." She stared into the mug. "Still want the answer?" I took my time. "No. You just get better at standing there." She let that sit between us. Then she said, "So when you tell someone the worst thing that's ever happened to them, what do they remember?" I felt something tighten low in my chest. "Usually not the words," I said. "Just whether you were honest." That made her go still. I knew then that she wasn't only asking out of curiosity. She was matching me against something. A memory. A record. A version of the night she'd been carrying for years. And the strange part was, instead of making me angry, it made me feel tired. Because I could see her doing it. Could see the effort it cost her to keep her voice even, to make each question sound accidental when it clearly wasn't. But there was something else happening too. She was starting to let me see her when she forgot to manage herself. The first real crack came on a Tuesday evening when I knocked on her door because a package had been left outside my place by mistake. She opened it with red eyes and immediately turned away. "Sorry," she said. "Bad timing." I should have handed her the box and left. Instead I asked, "What happened?" She stood there a second, then gave a short laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. "I read something I shouldn't have read tonight." I didn't ask what. She didn't offer. But I knew. Or thought I did. She pressed her fingers to her temple. "It's stupid. I do this thing where I tell myself I'm looking for clarity, but really I'm just opening old doors and acting surprised when there's nothing good behind them." I stayed by the doorframe. "That's not stupid." She looked at me then, properly, with all the control stripped off for once. "How would you know?" Because I had been doing my own version of that for 6 years. Because I still replayed one trauma bay in my head when the rest had finally blurred. Because sometimes after a hard shift I'd sit in my car and rear on a dead man's final hour like I was still going to find the one hidden turn that changed the ending. But I didn't say any of that. I just said, because some questions don't stay buried because you tell them to. She looked like I'd hit something raw. After that, being around her stopped feeling like an accident. We fell into routines neither of us named. Coffee from the place on Mercer when our mornings overlapped. 10-minute conversations in the hall that turned into 40. Her texting me once to ask if a cut on her hand needed stitches, then opening the door before I could knock like she'd been waiting behind it. Me cleaning and dressing it at her kitchen counter while she watched my face instead of her own hand. "You always this calm?" she asked. "No. You fake it well. Occupational requirement." She smiled, but it faded fast. I used to think doctors had some protected layer the rest of us didn't. And now? Now I think maybe you just hide damage better. That stayed with me all night. The problem was that by then I had stopped seeing her only as Daniel Miller's widow, even though that truth never left the room. She was funny in dry, quiet bursts. She noticed everything. She had a way of asking simple questions that were never simple. And beneath all that control was someone lonelier than she wanted anyone to know. And she was still checking me. I could feel it every time medicine came up. Every careful question about triage, delay, internal bleeding, decision windows. Every casual sounding, would that have changed much? Every moment where she looked at me not as a man, not even as a neighbor, but as a source. The thing that unsettled me most was this: the more she asked, the less it felt like she was catching me in lies. It felt like she was confirming something she didn't know how to survive. By then I was in trouble, because I had started looking for her too. In the parking lot. In the hallway. In the thin slice of light under her door when I came home too late. And I had the growing, unwelcome sense that whatever she came here to find, she was no longer sure she wanted the same answer she wanted before. Neither was I. I found out because she got careless for exactly 3 seconds. Not sloppy. Sarah was never sloppy. But people get tired, and tired people make small mistakes. It was late. I'd come off a 12-hour shift that had stretched into 14, and all I wanted was a shower and silence. I was halfway up the stairs when I saw her apartment door cracked open. Light on inside. Her voice low, sharp, controlled in that way that meant it had taken effort. "No, I understand what you're saying," she said. "I'm saying that if the records matched the sequence, then why does the transport note read like there was more time?" I stopped one step below her landing. There was a pause while someone on the other end talked. Then she said, quieter, "I'm not trying to build a case. I'm trying to know whether he missed something." I don't remember hearing the rest. That sentence was enough. I moved before I could think better of it. Her floorboard gave a small sound under my shoe, and she turned. The second she saw me, everything in her face emptied out. The phone stayed at her ear another second, maybe 2. Then she ended the call. We looked at each other across the half-open door. "I can explain," she said. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because there it was, the line people use when the explanation is already too late. "Can you?" I asked. She opened the door wider like she wasn't sure whether that was invitation or surrender. I went in because standing in the hallway felt worse. Her dining table was covered in papers. Not random papers. Copies. Notes in the margins. Printed medical articles. A yellow pad full of handwriting. And there, turned half sideways under the lamp, was a page with Daniel Miller's name across the top. Something in me went very still. She followed my eyes and didn't bother hiding it. "I was going to tell you." "When?" She didn't answer. I set my keys on the counter because suddenly my hands felt unreliable. "You moved here for this." Her throat worked once. Yes. Not denial. Not softening. Just yes. I nodded, once, because I needed some physical motion or I was going to stand there frozen. "So the mailbox. The cut on your hand. The questions about triage and delays and what people remember. All of that was what? Field research." Her expression changed at that. Hurt, but not defensive. "Not all of it." That's not a good answer. I know. I should have been angrier than I was. Maybe I would have preferred anger. Anger is clean. What I felt was worse. It was the slow, private realization that while I had been letting myself trust her in pieces, she had still been measuring whether I deserved to be trusted at all. She took a breath. "I requested records years ago. Then more records. I talked to 2 attorneys. Neither one would tell me anything definite. One thought maybe there was a delay. Another said it looked unwinnable and that didn't mean anything either. I read things I barely understood. I kept finding fragments, not answers. I looked at the papers again. "So you came here?" "Yes. To watch me." At first. That landed harder than if she'd lied. I turned away from her and looked out the dark kitchen window. Parking lot lights. Wet pavement. Nothing dramatic. Just the world continuing while something inside my chest pulled tight. "When did you recognize me?" I asked. The day you moved in, she said. Then corrected herself. The day I moved in. Of course. I nodded slowly. And you still let me sit in here. Talk to you. Help you. I didn't expect, she stopped, then started again. I didn't expect you to be who you are. I let out a breath through my nose. Who did you expect? I don't know. Someone colder. Someone more certain. Someone who had put that night away. That got my eyes back on her. She looked wrecked, and somehow that made it worse. Because none of this felt malicious anymore. It felt desperate. Methodical, yes. Wrong, yes. But built out of the kind of grief that keeps working long after everyone else thinks it should be done. I wasn't trying to trap you, she said. I was trying to understand whether my husband died because there was nothing left to do, or because someone made a call at the wrong time. Do you understand how different those lives are to live with? She lived 6 years haunted by a single what if. Have you ever had a question about the past that you just couldn't let go? Tell me in the comments. I stared at her for a long moment. Yes, I said. I do. That shut her up. Because I did understand. Better than she knew. I had lived 6 years inside my own version of the same question. She glanced at the papers, then back at me. I kept waiting to catch something. A contradiction. Some sign that the chart and the man didn't match. But they kept matching. You kept matching. And that made it harder, not easier. I rubbed a hand over my face. I was so tired I could feel it behind my eyes. You should have told me. I know. You don't get to decide whether I can survive being used. She flinched. Small, but real. That wasn't what this became. No, I said quietly. That's what it started as. Silence sat between us. Heavy, honest, ugly. Then she did the one thing that stopped me from walking out. She said, "Tell me I'm wrong." Not loud. Not accusing. Almost broken. Tell me he was already gone in every way that mattered before he got to you. Tell me there wasn't one more decision that could have changed it. Tell me I didn't spend years building my life around a possibility that was never real. I looked at her, and what hit me then wasn't suspicion. It was the full shape of her damage. She had not come here because she wanted a villain. She had come because uncertainty had hollowed out too much of her life and she could not keep living with maybe. And the worst part was that I had my own maybe. I pulled out the chair at her table and sat down in front of Daniel's file. She didn't move. If you want the truth, I said, then stop asking it sideways. Her face changed, not relief exactly, but something close to fear. I looked at the records, then up at her. Sit down, Sarah. I'll walk you through every minute of that night. All of it. No vague answers. No protecting either of us. She sat. I put my hand on the first page. And for the first time in 6 years, I opened the case like I was finally going to let another living person all the way inside it. I started with the clock. Not because the clock mattered more than anything else, but because people think emergency care is one long blur until you force it back into sequence. Once it has sequence, it stops feeling like myth. It becomes choices, limits, and time lost in exact places. Daniel arrived at 1:43, I said. The paramedics called ahead from the road. Rollover, driver side impact, heavy intrusion into the cabin. He was conscious at first on scene, then less responsive during transport. That part matters. Sarah sat across from me without touching the papers. Her hands were folded too tightly. She looked like she was holding herself still by force. I turned the first page toward her and pointed to the line. When they brought him in, we already knew we weren't dealing with one visible injury. We were dealing with what blunt force does when it has room to spread damage internally. That's the part people hate most, because from the outside it can look like there should have been more warning. She swallowed and nodded once. He had signs of major blood loss, I said. Not all of it external. His pressure was dropping. His abdomen was rigid. Breathing was compromised. We pushed blood, got imaging as fast as we could, called surgery early, not late. That's one of the things I checked most often afterward. I did not wait too long to call them. Her eyes moved over the records but kept coming back to my face, like she needed the pages and the man to agree at the same time. The transport note, I said, tapping another sheet, looks calmer than the room really was. That happens. Field notes compress things. They're written to document, not to carry the feeling of how fast someone is changing. On paper, a few minutes can look usable. In the room, those same minutes are already collapsing. She stared at the page. So there wasn't extra time. No, I said. Not in the way you needed there to be. The words hurt to say because I knew what they took from her. I kept going anyway. We made judgment calls. We always do. Airway first, circulation support, imaging fast enough to confirm what surgery needed to know, but not so much that we wasted the narrow window we had. I replayed that part more times than I can tell you. Whether I should have moved him sooner. Whether I should have skipped one step and gambled harder. Whether there was one aggressive call that might have changed the math. I looked down at my own hand on the file. It wasn't perfectly steady. The conclusion I keep reaching, I said, quieter now, is that I could have made it look different. I do not think I could have made it end different. Sarah closed her eyes. I let the silence stay. It belonged there. When she opened them again, they were wet but focused. Then why have you been carrying it like this? I gave a short breath that almost turned into a laugh and failed. Because doing everything you can and losing someone anyway doesn't feel clean from the inside. Because I told you he died, and you looked at me like the world had stopped making sense, and some part of me decided I should have been able to keep that from happening. Her mouth tightened. That's not rational. No, I said. It isn't. We sat there with that for a while. No dramatic collapse. No sudden relief. Just truth settling where suspicion had been. Finally she looked at Daniel's name on the page and said, I built so much around the idea that maybe there was a hidden mistake. I thought if I found it, at least the pain would have a shape. It did have a shape, I said. It just wasn't blame. That broke something in her face then. Not violently. More like exhaustion finally losing its grip. She covered her mouth with one hand and cried without sound. I stayed where I was. After a few seconds, I moved the box of tissues toward her and left it there. When she could speak again, she said, I'm sorry. I knew which part she meant. The move. The questions. The measuring. The quiet investigation folded into dinners and hallway conversations and all the small trust we'd built anyway. I know why you did it, I said. That doesn't make it fair. No. I looked at her. But fair stopped being available to either of us a long time ago. She nodded, crying a little harder at that, which I understood. After a while, the file stayed open but neither of us looked at it anymore. The dead had been given their place. So had the truth. There was nothing left to hunt. A week later, she knocked on my door just after sunset. No papers in her hand. No careful questions hidden inside casual ones. Just 2 containers of takeout and that same gray sweater from the day I first saw her. I ordered too much, she said. That sounds unlikely. It's an emotional support lie. Are you letting me in or not? So I stepped aside. We ate at my kitchen counter while the window over the sink turned dark. At one point her knee touched mine and neither of us moved away. It wasn't that the past had disappeared. Daniel was still real. That night was still real. But it was no longer sitting between us as accusation or punishment. Later, when she stood to leave, she paused by the door. I don't want to keep living like I'm still standing outside that room, she said. I looked at her for a long second. Then don't. She came back to me slowly, like we were both still learning what we were allowed to choose. When I kissed her, it was quiet and careful and fully awake. Nothing about it felt like betrayal. It felt like two people finally stepping out of a long corridor neither of them had meant to live in. After that, I stopped checking the hallway before opening my door. And when I saw her there now, it no longer felt like the past had come to collect something. It felt like the living had decided, carefully, to begin.